So,
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. And I am here with Denny S. Bryce, who is going to be talking about her new book, The Other Princess. We're celebrating a book birthday, which I love. I already had cake earlier. I don't know if you guys want to have some later, but you can help yourself. Before we get started, though, I just wanted to say a couple things. One is I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programming. Without them, we could do nothing. And I'd also like to thank Denny, who allowed us to partner with other libraries. So not only are we welcoming patrons from Ashland, but also from Andover, Bedford, Braintree, Clinton, Hanover, Hopedale, Lowell, Manchester, Medford, Milton, Needham, Norwell, Quincy, Seekonk, Tewksbury, Wareham, Woburn, and Wrentham. So, libraries get together. We make magic. It's amazing.
that is cool.
You can buy signed books from Denny from Aesop's Fable. I will put a link for that in the chat. And, I think signed books are gold, but you can also get them from the library because every library has Denny's books because they're amazing. So Denny S. Bryce, who is just amazing, just such an amazing writer. I'm actually not going to say too much about you, Denny, except that you do all kinds of stuff. And we're going to have a little talk about Joss Whedon at some point. But
oh my goodness, yes.
I'm going to let you tell us about you, and then we'll talk about your books.
Okay, that sounds fair. Hi, everybody. Denny S. Bryce. And I'm going to start by just saying a little bit about what I do now, and then I'm going to go back in time. What I do now is write books, and then I'm also an adjunct professor in the MFA program at Drexel University. I also, on occasion, write book reviews for NPR. I've also written for USA Today, freelance writing projects, and some other things. And USA Today, I can't remember the rest. And then quite a few independent teaching outside of Drexel for conferences and writing and crafts, sort of stuff like that. Now, how did I get into this biz? Because I am, my background as a college student, I was a theater and dance major. And then from theater and dance major, I became a professional dancer, worked in New York City and Chicago, and danced with companies that are a little older than you might be aware. Matthew Diamond was one. He's still a choreographer to this day. And Louis Falco. His claim to fame was a movie called Fame. He was the choreographer. Now that's a rather old film, but I was around him after that a little while. And then I danced with the second company of Alvin Ailey. Frankly, I think I was dancing with, when she was on the road, the artistic director. And my brain is a little foggy. I try to remember things, but I'm recovering from COVID. And so I'm having some brain lapses now and then. I also just finished handing in another book, but that's a whole different story. So after my dance career, which was phenomenal and fun and creative and all that good stuff, I started working in public relations and marketing. And I know. Well, I wrote all of the news releases for the dance companies. I had always been passionate about writing something. I kept a diary from the time I was like 10 years old, and I think I still have some of them in the house someplace. And, and the sad thing is sometimes you open a diary that's a few years old, like a couple of decades or 3 decades, and you look and your thought process has not changed that much, which is very frightening. But that's another aside. I went and started in public relations and marketing, frankly, because of my voice. I did a job called a media tour coordinator in Chicago, where I pitched TV shows, my customers, my clients, different, celebrity, what we used to call in the business talking heads. And so I did that because I have good phone voice. So I did that. Then after that fun and games, I stayed in PR and marketing for a while, got pretty darn good at it because I loved doing productions and putting on shows. To me, they were shows. To my corporate clients, they were events like business luncheons and black tie, this, that, and the other. I was like, these are parties, and you can call them anything you want. I'm a party planner just at a corporate level. So I got pretty good at it and started my own PR and marketing firm. After I did my PR and marketing firm, I did that actually for 20 years, ran a business and enjoyed it tremendously, loved what I was doing, but all the time or half the time I was doing it, every time I come home from work, crazy travel or whatever it was I was up to, I would write fan fiction. And that's where you mentioned Josh Whedon.
Mhm.
The fan fiction that I wrote was Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan fiction. And I was a huge Spike Buffy fan, not an Angel Buffy fan for those who have any Buffy the Vampire love in you. You know that there was always a war.
I am also Team Spike.
Yay! Because that was the better team. In fact, they're doing the cast. I'm still on one of the loops on Facebook with all the different writers and the Whedon fan club, if you will. Not Whedon because he's fallen out of grace, but the stars or the actors are doing a new audiobook. Not not David Boreanaz or the other Buffy herself, but the other cast members have gotten together for something, and I thought that was pretty cool. So I did all that writing, and a friend of mine who was also a writer, we used different names because it was internet and you had to be careful, and we were writing, I ran a business under another name, under my real name, and then I had my internet name, which happens to be the same as my name now, Denny. So we, she was a romance writer and good friend of mine online, never met her at an event in Las Vegas for fan fiction writers. And she introduced me to the world of romance writing. I hung out in that world for a while. And then did a lot of volunteer work and different things, and then moved from there into, you had asked before we came on about what got me into historical fiction. And I'm trying to think back I was the kind of reading I did, I wasn't a romance reader when I was heavily reading stuff. Maybe gothic romance. I was always looking for something, a little bit darker. But I guess it was Diana Gabaldon.
Mhm.
I tend to mess over her pronunciation of her name. The Outlander series. I kind of fell in love hard with that series, and her writing, and even though there's 1,200 pages to a book, because they were pretty long, I really enjoyed that. And I also had gravitated towards history a lot when I was in college, and even going back to high school. I just, give me something that was happening in the past. I was digging in. And part of that, I think, was because I was doing a lot of journalism once I got into marketing and PR. And my natural instinct is to dig for facts or for more information. I want more information. And that's historical fiction allows you to definitely sort of feed that craving.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow, that is a circuitous route to where you are right now.
Right? Right.
Okay.
I'm in my fourth or fifth career. I think I'm gonna,
Well,
stick to
you're
this.
constantly evolving, we'll say.
Yeah, yeah.
But were you a reader when you were a kid?
Yes,
I knew
yes.
you were a writer, but were you a reader?
I think that I was a writer first. I read, but I became passionate about reading about 16 or 17. When I was younger, I was just made up stories. I was an entertainer first.
Mm.
Part of what my brother and I would do around family gatherings, everybody would look to us to entertain. So we put on shows, and
Mhm.
it was very silly. We could play piano, we could sing and whatever, but we were 6 and 7 years old, and so, we loved being in the spotlight. I know I did, and so, he ended up being a lawyer, so maybe it's the same difference, but, so I really enjoyed that sort of like making people, either laugh or pay attention or applause.
Mhm.
And so that was my entree into storytelling. But later, I got very much involved in reading a lot of. It's hard for me to remember because now I'm so immersed in now in terms of my reading, but I've been asked recently what were some of my favorite books, and I found that there was a pattern, The Color Purple by Alice Walker, a book by Leon Erwis called Mila 18, which is not one of his, he wrote Exodus, he wrote a lot of books that were turned into films. This one I remember distinctly, and I think I read it, I don't know, I was probably 17 or 18 or something like that. It might have been a school book. To Kill a Mockingbird. Um, there's a book, and I can't pronounce his name properly, so I won't try, but the name of the book is The Chosen, and there were three books about Hasidic Jews, and a young man, two young men who have different directions to go. Beautiful book. It's Cham Potok. I know I'm mispronouncing his name. Chaimpotok is the last name, I believe. So those are some books that resonate. I liked Jane Eyre, um, stuff like that.
Mhm.
So, what was this one that I came up with? My favorite all-time book is actually a children's book, a children's series. The first book is called A Wrinkle in Time by
Mhm.
Madeline D. L. Engel.
Mhm.
But right now, there's just so much, especially as a book critic and a writer. First, I don't get to read as much as I would love to read because I'm busy writing, or I'm reading to write about what I'm reading.
Mhm.
And that's a different approach when I'm reviewing a book or I'm doing a book blurb for a book. It's a different type of reading. And I miss reading for the sake of reading,
Mhm.
but I do a lot of reading. So, and I enjoy what I read. I do audiobooks now too,
Mhm.
a
Yeah,
lot of audiobooks.
because there's a performance involved in that, which I love.
Yes. Yes. And that's one that, you hit on something there because when I first listened to the Outlander books, Diana,
Gabaldon.
she's not the gal who does the narration on that is extraordinary. She is so good. I'm listening to books by S.A. Cosby. He
Mhm.
wrote, you know who I'm talking about. The guy who does his narration is amazing.
Yeah.
The people who did Wild Women in the Blues, the two um, individuals, I have no names, so don't ask.
It's okay.
But they're fabulous. They're on Audible when you go look. And I have a fabulous gal who's doing The Other Princess now too, and I can't even pronounce her name, so I'm not going to try. But nonetheless, audiobooks are when they, especially for someone who is, um, I love old films. I love as an old theater and dance person, a theatrical person, that performance art through narration of books is amazing.
Yeah.
Um, I love it.
I actually only listen to books I've already read because I love rereading books, but I don't always have time. So then I know the story and I can enjoy the performance of an
Ah,
audiobook. It's weird.
ah.
um,
So, you know,
like, the other princess is, novel of Queen Victoria's Goddaughter, which is, interesting. But like the one thing that came up in my research about this was that it was, what did it say? Like, that it was recently rediscovered historical figure. How did that happen? That somebody's entire story got lost in time and you found it, or you were able to?
I didn't find it. I didn't find it. It had already been found. And I'll give you Walter Myers back in 1999 wrote a book called At Her Majesty's Request about Sarah Forbes Bonetta. The
Mhm.
way he got the information was that he was known in the book world. He's an African American male here in the US of A who wrote children's books, but he was known through a network of old bookstores, including those in the UK, for being someone who loved old books.
Mhm.
And someone in a bookstore found Sarah Forbes Bonetta's writings and some pages and letters and called him, said, "You should, next time you're in London, come by my store and check this out." So he was definitely one of the early people to rediscover her.
Mhm.
Um, she is mentioned in Queen Victoria's, some of Queen Victoria's million plus words of diary that are available. But Queen Victoria, and I didn't use this in the book because I found it confusing, called her Sally. Nicknames were very popular, like Bertie. She called her son Albert's Prince Albert's son, Albert Bertie.
Mhm.
Everybody had a nickname. And so Sarah Forbes Bonetta was Sally. And so unless you dig, it's hard to pull out these facts
Mhm.
about her. And I think in the last, well, in 2016, in the PBS series Victoria, she was her character was in one of the episodes, maybe two of the episodes. Her character, a character who was the African little girl that Queen Victoria rescued or was gifted to. Um, she appeared in that. So there had been some history happening about Sarah Forbes Bonetta. I
Mhm.
did not discover her.
But something about her story intrigued you.
It here's what intrigued me. First, there was a woman by the name, my editor, named Tessa Woodward at William Morrow, who wrote on then Twitter that a tweet that said, "I wonder why no one has written a book about Sarah Forbes Bonetta." So I saw it and I went to work um, looking up information and putting together a pitch, especially after I was encouraged by one of my author friends to do so, a woman by the name of Vanessa Riley, who has written quite a few fabulous books
Love
herself.
her.
Um, so with that, I my research began there, and when I started to dig is when I became fascinated, and I don't want to give away any spoilers. There are moments in her life that just made me go, wow, I can't believe this young woman made that decision. And some of those moments gave me enough um, character, enough fiber, enough layers to write what I was very hopeful is a multi-layered story about a very complicated young woman who went through quite a bit in her lifetime,
Mhm.
and also conquered some things, because the whole book is not about pain and suffering. It's about dealing and surviving and being bright and being very much someone who uses their mind to do the best that they can for themselves, especially after having a lot of hard knocks.
Mhm. Yeah, because again, like you said, not giving away any spoilers, but when you say Queen Victoria's goddaughter, you think of this sort of like beloved, person in somebody's life, but she really wasn't, right?
Well, I don't know if I think she was definitely liked, but Queen Victoria's track record was have babies and leave them alone. And
Oh.
then and then, she had a whole group of people taking care of her children.
Mhm.
And her devotion was to her husband and to her country that she was running. And she had 10 kids, but goodness gracious, she wasn't necessarily that close to all of them. She was not, I'm not saying she was a bad mother, but she had things she had to get done.
Mhm.
And I don't want to say the way the world was structured then, there are some things that are just you can't get around. And one of those things is that Sarah Forbes Bonetta was an African. She was an African in the royal household, a part of the royal household. She was friends and played with the royal children, but she had meetings with the queen. Wasn't like she was running through the castle and, hey, how you doing, Queen Victoria? No, just like everybody else, she had to make arrangements. And during those um, meetings, especially when she was younger, her role was to demonstrate to the queen that she was doing her lessons, that she was learning how to play the piano, that her English was so outstanding. She was always on, if you will. That's one way of looking at it.
But
I get phone calls during. Why do they call?
I was going to say that it sounded to me like she was sort of trotted out as a spectacle on occasion by Queen Victoria, as opposed to, I mean, I don't know, did she trot out her children as well? It sounded like she might
I
have.
think, yeah, I think, well, part of that um, time period, the Victorian time period, and there was women were not did not have opportunities. I mean, she was queen, so she got to do things that nobody else could do. But nonetheless, the way she had to do things was that she had to have a husband to do it, and she was always struggling with Parliament,
Mhm.
male, et cetera, et cetera. So her children, including Sarah Forbes Bonetta, she only had so much leeway in her life
Mm.
and so much she could accomplish. Yes, the press was stunned by some of the choices that Queen Victoria made in terms of presenting her goddaughter or ward um, to society, and in weaving her into those moments, sure. But at the same time, there were restrictions that she was still an African, and there was racism, there was prejudice, especially when you look at the role of Africans in the court if they were either coming in as kings or queens. But Queen Victoria sent her back to Africa for education. And I'll give away one small spoiler. She goes to England after she is gifted to the queen. She gets to meet the queen, but after a while, she ends up back in Africa. And the reason she's back in Africa is a lack of civility, if you will, by the royal household when it came to Africans, period.
Mm.
But once she got back to Africa, it was still, colonialism was strong during that time period. And what I mean by that is that identity was stripped from her. She was born Anya, Princess Anya, a princess daughter of a king in an African village. As soon as she's gifted, before she can even make it back to England, she's introduced to missionaries in Africa who automatically want to give her another name, a name that is not a savage name.
Mm.
You know, and these terms were used.
Mm-hmm.
So there were definitely some, um, and not some, there was definitely a difference in the way she was treated because of the color of her skin. There was also um, something that she realized and recognized about this as she grew a little bit older, that put made her more conscious of how important it was. She, in order to get what she wanted, she had to do certain things. Um, you know, she had to behave a certain way until she made a decision and a choice to do something that was totally, um, fascinatingly strong-willed, I would
Mm-hmm.
say.
And is that strong-willed thing, is that so it's historical fiction, so some of it is obviously
The
based on,
strong-willed thing is something she did do.
yeah, okay.
It's definitely, I have a document.
We like that.
Well,
um
it helps. It helps you shape characters when you're writing historical fiction and you have access to factual things and letters that your main character has written. You get sort of an understanding of who they might have been. So you run with it.
mhm. Yeah, and I think that, for me, like as a reader of historical fiction, I love that because, the way that you interweave the reality with your imagination is just incredible.
Can't go too far on the imagination front, but as long as you have some, what I call benchmarks,
Mhm.
historical benchmarks that you can just sort of drop, that are not just drop, but they have legs and, in the ground, stuck in certain spots. And that way you can shape your story to those benchmarks.
Stephanie says, or asks, was Victoria closer to Alice than her other children? Then Stephanie says, I have another question that I can't ask because of spoilers.
Um, I think from what I've read, there were so many kids, okay? So many. I had a whole spreadsheet, birthdays, blue, blue, blue. I don't know. I'm sure someone would say someone was closest to her, but I think that she devoted a lot of time to the marriage of the Princess Royal, the oldest daughter,
Mhm.
Victoria. And in fact, the wedding march by Mendelssohn was played at at the royal, at Princess Victoria's wedding, and that became a standard.
Mhm. Mhm.
The wedding march. And but then again, in her later years, she was closest to her youngest daughter, Beatrice, Princess Beatrice, who was the one who was with her all the time, um, after her husband's death, moving forward, because that's when she closed down,
Mhm.
after his death. And she was a relatively young woman, um, relatively young. She was a young woman. She was only in her 40s.
Yeah.
And because he passed when he was 42, I believe.
Mhm.
But that changed her demeanor and how she interacted with the world. But her daughters, after she passed, combed through her diaries and got rid of the stuff that she didn't want the public to notice. So, for example, for those who have seen movies or whatever about her relationship with a Scottish gentleman,
Mhm.
he's not mentioned in her diaries. Beatrice took all that stuff out.
The great redactor. Right.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the structure of this book a little bit because it's pretty big departure from your other books. You know, Wild Women and In the Face of the Sun were both like sort of these intertwined stories, where the other princess is more of a direct narrative. What made you go in a different direction like that?
My editor.
Ooh, okay.
Yes, yes. It was, I wasn't gonna do, I didn't have any two POVs, but I had two
Right.
timelines. And the opening of the book, for those who have read it, is actually omniscient opening, the prologue. And then it is, boom, her POV from, and it's chronological.
Mhm.
Um, and that is, that was fun. That was fun. Now, the book I'm working on, I just handed in, is another dual storyline.
Is that Rhinelander?
Yeah.
That's like
Notice how I said that. Yeah, that book. Woo!
I was looking up all of your books and I was like, oh my God, like all of your books look fascinating, but that one looked particularly.
Yeah.
Um, so so were you going to do it differently before your editor said to do?
I had a slightly different approach, and she was spot on in saying, yeah, let's try chronological, because and part of that made so much sense to me as soon as she said it, was that you don't want to take away the ending, or if not the ending, there was just something about introducing certain things too soon.
Mhm,
The chronological story played out so much better. And
mhm.
so I was a fan as soon as we had that conversation. That's what revision is all about, and working with a professional editor, because one of the things that when you're writing 105,000 words, you don't always see what is it, forest for the trees, or trees for the forest, or whatever the cliche is. You don't see it. You plan it, you plot it, you work hard, and you outline, because I'm an outliner, to get lay it out. But sometimes that expert, not sometimes, I like working with editors. I want to have that interaction, that discussion, that debate,
Mhm,
because it fine tunes the story.
mhm.
And also, especially if your editor is in tune with your story, um, you're going to get something better, I
Mhm.
think.
Yeah.
And again, only had 3 books.
Well, you'll have many more in the future, I can tell.
Yes.
What was the most fascinating thing you found out about the other princess, Sarah? Yeah,
I'm
your
trying to
research
see,
that you
without
either
spoilers,
used.
that's a tough one. Um, oh man, I'm going through, trying to go through. The most fascinating thing is the one that I don't want to mention. Um, she, I'll tell you about the research. Something that was fascinating was to find the journals of Commander Frederick E. Forbes, written in 1849 and 1850,
Mhm.
where he paid annual visits to Africa. He's a British naval officer on, doing doing what he's supposed to do for the Queen on behalf of the Queen. And he wrote these detailed journals that not only talked about his interactions with the different kingdom kings, but also about, the plant life, the animal life, the and to actually flip through pages and artist renderings.
Oh.
Someone drew
Mhm,
pictures of different, including Sarah Forbes, well, Princess Anya, but just going through that was amazing
mhm,
to have that sort of resource. Now, again, um, you, as a researcher, and especially as an African American woman or as a Black woman, as a woman, when you have all of this history that you're culling through, you have to, at least to me, part of what your job is to take a look at it, but discern what is real from what is the position or the political mindset of the author of these materials back in the time.
Mhm.
Even some of Sarah's letters that I read through, I could tell she was working to accomplish something other than to get somebody to bring her a new dress and made a certain way on a certain day. And so much of history in the past was written by men, and most of those men were white.
Mhm.
So power structure, power play, goals, it's a lot of work to take a look at history and then draw from it what you feel will be most relevant to today's readers.
Mhm. So I got the opportunity to chat with Piper Hughley a few weeks ago, and we talked about this sort of lost history of African American Black individuals throughout history. And I asked her why she didn't write nonfiction, and her
Hmm.
answer was that there's not enough primary sources for the story, that like a biography of like
Right.
whoever she was going to write about. I don't know, did you find out about Princess Anya, that there was just not enough
Princess
primary sources?
Anya had the most information that I've ever run into about real words from someone, a Black woman, in history that I have researched. Now, looking at the other two books up till that time, the other two books, Wild Women in the Blues and In the Face of the Sun, there was nothing there.
Mhm.
But I wasn't writing biographical historical fiction, but nonetheless, I was writing historical fiction, and it would have been fabulous to grab a diary of a dance hall girl. Um, Nonfiction, again, who's writing the nonfiction? And what are their motivations and goals? Like, even with the other book, that's my next book coming out in March, it's called Can't We Be Friends? It's a novel of Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe. Um, the biographies, nonfiction that I've read, there's a new one coming out, but that wasn't available to me. But the ones that I had read were mostly about her musical career. It Not very little personal information. Now, she was a very private person,
Mm.
but nonetheless, you read somebody else's biography and they're interested in their personal life.
Mhm.
None of her biographers were interested in her personal life. They were interested in what show, what music, who she was playing with, and who was in the band. And Norman Gantz was her manager for a significant stretch. Uh, but you read his biography, it's a lot of personal stuff, a lot of what he was thinking, what he was doing, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
So anyway, I totally agree with Piper. First of all, we're creatives, and we're novelists, and the opportunity to tell stories is very much important to us. She is a historical person. I'm a historical geek. She's a professor. So, I mean, I teach craft, writing craft, which is different, but even at that, I would not, I want to tell stories, and there's so much space in the world for those stories to be told. And what we want to do, I think, if you were to get a room full of women of color, Black women, writers, and authors, what we want is to have more and more books out there and more readers talking up the books that they love by those authors of color, by those Black authors, because we want to break into the big time, because that sustains, that
Mhm.
helps sustainability and and storytelling, because there's so many more stories to tell. I
Mhm.
mentioned S.A. Cosby. He's writing fabulous true crime, well, crime fiction. Um, but it's rooted in so much of what African American culture and just good stuff there. There's so many authors out there, so many authors out there. So just everybody read more, read more.
Well, I mean, I think people have to be willing to expand their horizons, not stay in the same lane
Right.
as they always have, to understand that the world was much more diverse
Mm.
always than, we've been told. But does it surprise you that this is what you're doing? You went from like this sort of dancer, center of attention, to like really talking about the depth of storytelling and bringing out stories that have been hidden or thrown away.
Actually, no, it doesn't surprise me that I'm at this place at this time. Mainly because I think I'm always, even remember when I mentioned my earlier career, I was also a choreographer.
Mhm.
That's physical, your body is telling stories. Um, Storytelling has just been a part of my framework. And same thing with producing events for 5, 10,000 people. Um, every It's like a big puzzle that you put all the pieces together, and then opening night, it's amazing.
Mhm.
And that was always my energy and my attitude toward that kind of work. Other people look at it differently, perhaps, but that's the kind of approach I used. So,
Mhm.
no, I'm not surprised I'm here.
I'm glad you are. I just want to remind people that are listening in that you are welcome to put questions in the Q&A. I'm happy to ask Denny, although we won't go to spoilers for sure. Uh, um, so I have this weird question actually. So I think I told you before we started that I had heard about Wild Women in the Blues from Kristen Higgins, who you said that also wrote a wonderful review for The Other Princess. And I wonder, it, is that the kind of thing that has to happen in publishing for writers to support each other so that these more diverse stories can get out?
Well, it's a combination of factors that will help spread the word and get more people buying the books. It's definitely part of the framework of a lot of the authors that I know, meet, interact with, is supporting each other.
Mhm.
And it seems so easy and so natural that it's a pleasure to be around the author community. So that's one aspect, one element that is certainly helpful. But you also have to look at, if you're traditionally published, like I am, your publisher and your advertising and marketing team um, and publicity team in house have to sit back and have conversations about how they can do better and do more for all of the books that pass, their preview, because there's so much. They're putting out a lot of books a month, and
Mhm.
they don't have individual people assigned to each author.
Right.
They have teams,
Mhm.
and that team may be doing, I don't even know how many books a month, but they need to take a look at all of those books. And when they have a good book, get it out there, have a consistency and energy towards success. It's when I was doing marketing and PR, we'd sit around and talk about our success model. That is deliberately making a decision that you're going to have a success, and you can plan towards success. So that is something we need to see consistently out of New York, out of wherever publishers are. But then, as a marketing person, word of mouth is still the way to sell books. Now, I was talking to a fellow author today, and we were talking about TikTok.
Hmm.
And TikTok is a word of mouth kind of sort of vehicle. But right now, it's a barrier for authors of color. The predominant TikTok success stories are white authors, and their supporters are white readers. And those books, those stars of TikTok are getting big contracts. So, how do you break that social media model that is showing success if you're writing certain genres? I'm a historical fiction author. And I'm not going to do a lot of personality posts.
Mhm.
And what I mean by personality posts is me, hi everybody, la la la. And some people are great at it. I am not dishing those people at all. Some people are fabulous. It's not necessarily something that I would do. Um, I have followers on TikTok. I haven't, not millions. I got 1,000. I'm not mad, but I like music. I like entertainment. I love old films. So if you're going to see anything from me in that area, it may not be trendy enough to grab that TikTok. But back to my point, word of mouth. If you like a book, talk about it. Write Goodreads reviews, write reviews and give books 5, 4 stars
Mhm.
on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, whatever. Tell people that you're having a great read. And also going back to what you were just saying, read outside of your lane. I read everything, well,
Mhm.
almost everything. I read a lot of different, genres. I don't just read historical fiction. I read romance. I read women's fiction. Well, what they call women's fiction, I call it general fiction. I read commercial. Read literary, upmarket, boom. 1,000 word, 1,000 page books. I read them all. Um, and that reading experience is something I really enjoy. I love words. I
Mhm.
love words on a page. I love stories where I'm just sitting there going, wow, you know. And I had someone ask uh, in one of the articles I've just recently responded to, is there a book I wish I'd written? And my answer was no. I read books to enjoy books. I write books because I love to write, but I don't necessarily look at a book and say, boy, I wish I had written that.
Mhm.
Somebody else wrote that. And I'm not going to try and say I'm going to I got to write that book. I wish I'd done it.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. No, it's already been written. It's already good and it's already out there.
Chandler says, Piper said that in her webinar with me that historical romance was a dying genre. Do you
Hmm.
agree with that? Because it's his favorite genre.
I don't write historical romance, but what the industry will tell you is that historical romance had a heyday, if you will, when it was available in mass market.
Mm,
Mass market size book is not happening right now. And the change, and I'm sure she specifically mentioned historical romance. That genre of historical romance is probably not um, as prolific in terms of sales as it once was. But then again, the vehicle through which it reached consumers is not what's being packaged right now. See, now I'm getting to marketing speak and not
yeah.
really answering your question. But
Well, they will also want to know, how do you stay passionate about your genre, and how easy is it to create stories out of the research you've done?
um, I love coming up with story ideas. For example, my next book that I have to write It's going to be a historical, psychological thriller. And I am so excited about that. I am just thrilled. And then another story idea that I have is a I got three timelines in it, and it has magical realism. And so we got 1860s, 1960s, and present day.
Mhm.
So to me, I come up with, I love coming up with story ideas and looking at history as a vehicle through which to tell a story that might have, that hopefully has relevance and resonates with today's reader. So
Mhm.
I don't have I don't have any barriers to my thought process on storytelling because I started the book I have under the bed is a vampire story. And
So is there any particular thread that runs through all your books that they have to be historical, but they don't have to be historical fiction? They have to be
no,
a black stories
I'm
or
gonna have a black protagonist.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the story I want to tell. I think that's the story I should tell. And frankly, I don't know that many non-black or non-people of color who going to put a protagonist out there who doesn't look like them.
Mhm.
If they do, that's risky, in my opinion, because how do you know that story?
Mhm.
Um, and when I say look like them, I will write a man. I wrote a male POV in what's the name of the book? Wild Women in the Blues, and we'll probably do that again in the future. So, and romance writers are brilliant at doing that. Nobody sits up there and says, "Oh no, you don't write a man." Um, but I don't have I might be different than some because 3 books. I just wanna tell all the stories, and I
Mhm.
think that, sometimes I'm gonna be writing, historical fiction that has, um, a genre mashup, as they like to call it. I'm gonna throw in a little romance, I'm gonna throw in some thrills, I'm gonna throw in a couple of serial killers, I don't know. Or I'm gonna do like I've been doing in the last couple of books, and it's gonna be biographical historical fiction.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, we'll read anything you write, Denny. So just keep going.
Okay.
Denise wants to know if you read fantasy.
I no, I don't read that much fantasy, except for a friend of mine, Leslie Penelope, who writes brilliant fantasy. I read her stuff, and because we're also writing buddies, so she helped me out with The Other Princess, for example, and I worked with her on her book at that time that she was working on. So I read her stuff. I I'll read a vampire story or paranormal. Yeah.
Considered fantasy.
No, well, when I think of fantasy, you have your high fantasy, your middle fan,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like
it's
The
all
Hobbit
complicated.
versus, yeah.
Yeah.
So we just have a couple more minutes, and I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about your next two books that are coming out.
Yes, yes. Okay. I mentioned in March 5th, 2024, my next book is with Eliza Knight, who is author of Starring Adele Astaire, which is a fabulous book, historical fiction.
Mhm.
And before that, she had the Mayfair Bookshop.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
And that's an I can't remember everything. But anyway, so I'm writing it with Eliza Knight, or wrote it with Eliza Knight because it's done. And it's the story of the friendship between Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe. And that's some real stuff there. We dug through history, cleaned up some of the misinformation that's out there, but also you're going to read it. Well, you're going to I think I don't think Ella's ever been fictionalized in a story, so a historical fiction context. And this book is taking place begins in 1952 and ends in 19. well, there's a preamble or a prologue that begins in 1972. But so it's about a 10-year, and then it skips around a little bit at the beginning and end. But and Marilyn, Eliza and I started talking about this book in 2019, and it just kept gnawing at us. And we pitched it to our editor, and we pitched it to some other people, and it ended up getting bought. So we're very excited about that coming out. And after that, in July of 2024, the trial of Mrs. Rhinelander comes out. And Rhinelander versus Rhinelander was a huge case in 1925. A very wealthy young white man by the name of Leonard Kip Rhinelander married his domestic. She is a housekeeper servant, not his personally, but that was sort of her lot in life. And they had been dating and seeing each other for 3 years, and they got married. And then a couple of weeks after they got married, he filed for an annulment, sued her for an annulment on the grounds that she never told him that she was colored. And from there, all sorts of shenanigans ensue. But that book was amazing to research because there are, what is it called? Transcripts, court transcripts. And to position this case and how huge it was in newspapers, because keep in mind that in the 1920s, it was the newspaper was the god of information. And Leopold and Loeb was a big case that was in Chicago. The two young men who were wealthy killed a little boy and almost got away with it. And then the other big case during that same time period was the Stokes monkey trial, which was a huge front page, yellow journalism, crazy pants headlines. And this Rhinelander case was just as big.
Wow.
It's fun.
Yeah. Well, and also even, these things get lost. It's been it's been 100 years. So like for us to like now hear about it, I think is really amazing. So it doesn't ever completely fall out of our consciousness.
Right. Well, I discovered this story idea from another editor. Who's now at Berkeley, Essie Soga, who's my editor on Wild Women in the Blues and In the Face of the Sun at Kensington. So yeah, those editors they're sitting there just thinking all the time too. So they're so once you get going, it's fun. It's fun to have that interaction and have your friends, your author friends, and brainstorming and the whole thing. I love it all.
Well, we love reading it all, so it's good. So Denny, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I know you have another program right after this, and I really appreciate everybody being here and listening in, and I'm sure being as fascinated as I have been. So thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful night and you get to really like push this book, because I know you haven't been able to for the last week.
I'll get to it. It'll all get done.
All right. Well,
I really appreciate it.
absolutely.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Yep. Take care.
Okay.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.